Random House Audiobooks presents An Unquiet Mind by Redfield Jamison. Read for you by the author.
An Unquiet Mind. When it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're manic, even the UCLA Medical Center has a certain appeal. Ordinarily a cold clotting of uninteresting buildings, the hospital became for me, that fall morning not quite 20 years ago, a focus of my finely wired, exquisitely alert nervous system. With antennae perked and eyes fast-forwarding, I took in everything around me. I was on the run. Not just on the run, but fast and furious on the run, darting back and forth across the hospital parking lot, trying to use up an endless, restless, manic energy. I was running fast, but slowly going mad. The man I was with, a colleague from the medical school, had stopped running an hour earlier and was, he said impatiently, exhausted. This, to a saner mind, would not have been surprising. The endless hours of scotch, brawling, and falling about in laughter had taken an obvious, if not final, toll. Suddenly a police car pulled up. The officer had his hand on his gun as he got out of the car. "What in the hell are you doing running around the parking lot at this hour?" he asked. A not unreasonable question. My few remaining islets of judgment linked up long enough to conclude that this particular situation was going to be hard to explain. My colleague, fortunately, was thinking far better than I was, and said, "We're both on the faculty in the psychiatry department." The policeman looked at us, smiled, went back to his squad car, and drove away. Being professors of psychiatry explained everything. Within a month of signing my appointment papers to become an assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles, I was well on my way to madness. It was 1974, and I was 28 years old. Within 3 months, I was manic beyond recognition, and just beginning a long, costly personal war against a medication that I would, in a few years' time, be strongly encouraging others to take. My illness and my struggles against the drug that ultimately saved my life and restored my sanity had been years in the making. For as long as I can remember, I was frighteningly, although often wonderfully, beholden to moods. Intensely emotional as a child, mercurial as a young girl, first severely depressed as an adolescent, and then unrelentingly caught up in the cycles of manic-depressive illness by the time I began my professional life. I became, both by necessity and intellectual inclination, a student of moods. It has been the only way I know to understand, indeed to accept, the illness I have. It also has been the only way I know to try and make a difference in the lives of others who also suffer from mood disorders. The disease that has, on several occasions, nearly killed me, does kill tens of thousands of people every year. Most are young, most die unnecessarily, and many are among the most imaginative and gifted that we as a society have. The Chinese believe that before you can conquer a beast, you first must make it beautiful. In some strange way, I have tried to do that with manic-depressive illness. It has been my fascinating, albeit deadly, enemy and companion. I have found it to be seductively complicated, a distillation both of what is finest in our natures and what is most dangerous. In order to contend with it, I first had to know it in all of its moods and infinite disguises, understand its real and imagined powers. Because my illness seemed to me, initially, simply to be an extension of myself, that is to say, of my ordinarily changeable moods, energies, and enthusiasms, I perhaps gave it at times too much quarter. And because I thought I ought to be able to handle my increasingly violent mood swings by myself, for the first 10 years I did not seek any kind of treatment. Even after my condition became a medical emergency, I still intermittently resisted the medications that both my training and clinical research expertise told me were the only sensible way to deal with the illness I had. My manias, at least in their early and mild forms, were absolutely intoxicating states that gave rise to great personal pleasure, an incomparable flow of ideas and thoughts, and a ceaseless energy that allowed the translation of new ideas into papers and projects. Medications not only cut into these fast-flowing, high-flying times, they also brought with them seemingly intolerable side effects. It took me far too long to realize that lost years and relationships cannot be recovered, that damage done to oneself and others cannot always be put right again, and that freedom from the control imposed by medication loses its meaning when the only alternatives are death and insanity. The war that I waged against myself is not an uncommon one. The major clinical problem in treating manic-depressive illness is not that there are not effective medications. There are, but that patients so often refuse to take them. Worse yet, because of a lack of information, poor medical advice, stigma, or fear of personal and professional reprisals, they do not seek treatment at all. Manic depression is an illness that is biological in its origin, yet one that feels psychological in the experience of it. An illness that is unique in conferring advantage and pleasure, yet one that brings in its wake almost unendurable suffering and, not infrequently, suicide. I am fortunate that I have not died from my illness, fortunate in having received the best medical care available, and fortunate in having the friends, colleagues, and family that I do. Because of this, I have in turn tried to use my own experiences of the disease to inform my research, teaching, clinical practice, and advocacy work. Through writing and teaching, I have hoped to persuade my colleagues of the paradoxical core of this quicksilver illness that can both kill and create, and, along with many others, have tried to change public attitudes about psychiatric illnesses in general and manic-depressive illness in particular. It has been difficult at times to weave together the scientific discipline of my intellectual field of study with the more compelling realities of my own emotional experiences. And yet it has been from this binding of raw emotion to the distanced eye of clinical science that I have obtained the freedom to live the life I want, and the human experiences necessary to try and make a difference in public awareness and clinical practice. I have no idea what the long-term effects of discussing such issues so openly will be on my personal and professional life, but whatever the consequences, they are bound to be better than continuing to be silent. I am tired of hiding, tired of misspent and knotted energies, tired of the hypocrisy, and tired of acting as though I have something to hide. One is what one is, and the dishonesty of hiding behind a degree or a title or any collection of words is still exactly that, dishonest. I still have concerns about my decision to be public about my illness, but one of the advantages of having had manic-depressive illness for almost 30 years is that very little seems insurmountably difficult. One may be terrified to go forward, but there is no question of going back. I find myself somewhat inevitably taking a certain solace in Robert Lowell's essential question. Yet why not say what happened? I was standing with my head back, one pigtail caught between my teeth, listening to the jet overhead. The noise was loud, unusually so, which meant that it was close. My elementary school was near Andrews Air Force Base, just outside Washington. Many of us were pilots' kids, so the sound was routine. Being routine, however, didn't take away from the magic, and I instinctively looked up from the playground to wave. I knew, of course, that the pilot couldn't see me, just as I knew that even if he could see me, the odds were it wasn't my father. But it was one of those things one did, and anyway, I loved any and all excuses to stare up into the skies. My father, a career Air Force officer, was first and foremost a scientist, and only secondarily a pilot. But he loved to fly, and because he was a meteorologist, both his mind and his soul ended up being in the skies. Like my father, I looked up rather more than I looked out. The noise of the jet had become louder, and I saw the other children in my second-grade class suddenly dart their heads upwards. The plane was coming in very low, then it streaked past us, scarcely missing the playground. As we stood there absolutely terrified, it flew into the trees, exploding directly in front of us. Within minutes, it seemed, mothers were pouring onto the playground to reassure children that it was not their father's. Fortunately for my brother and sister and myself, it was not ours either. Over the next few days, it became clear, from the release of the young pilot's final message to the control tower, that he knew he could save his own life by bailing out. He also knew, however, that by doing so he risked that his unaccompanied plane would fall onto the playground and kill those of us who were there. The dead pilot became a hero, transformed into a scorchingly vivid, completely impossible ideal for what was meant by the concept of duty. The memory of the crash came back to me many times over the years, both as a reminder of how one aspires.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?